Hi, this is Sarah Nance, and this is my case study analysis for the Truman Elementary case study. Category one was to identify the problem and kind of analyze it. So I started with what I know about this case. And basically, at Truman Elementary School, students have declined in their reading scores in state assessment testing more significantly than in other areas such as mathematics. Parents are obviously and noticeably upset in our school's achievement numbers. And so we hired a reading specialist to kind of look a little bit more closely at some of our classrooms to identify some further issues. So I also know that the reading specialist then proposed a detailed list of findings and recommendations to recover our reading scores in our school. The Department of Education recently decided to award some grant money to schools that can prove that they need it and that they are prepared with research and some activities to do within their budget. And so I obviously know that I need to get on that and act accordingly. So I have to organize and support efforts in our school for the grant money to be awarded and used appropriately. And I would obviously use this for our reading scores. What I still need to know is how to go about this, basically. How can we best bolster our application for grant money? So I need to understand what is already happening in our school or not happening in our school so that I can, articulate what we need and how we would use the money. Assuming that we are granted the money, I need to know where my stakeholders stand within the community, parent community, teacher community, about reading deficiencies at Truman Elementary. And I also need to know what demographic data is influencing the achievement data. So is it because of race? Is it because of gender? Is it because of language? What kind of demographics are holding us back a little bit to help me understand appropriately how we can influence professional development and then also how we can get that grant money and use it effectively. I also need to know where my teachers stand on this directive and if they'll be able to make changes and how willing they are to make changes. I would probably need to know if I could use this money to hire a reading specialist in the school itself, not just somebody to come in and do kind of a diagnostic, but to be hired on full time. And I also want to know if teachers are supportive of these measures and in which ways they feel comfortable helping and feel supported and want to help. So to identify the problem, it really seems that from the reading specialist who came in and proposed that list of recommendations that it's really a disorganization of the curriculum and an inability to focus on a common goal with reading across all content areas at Truman Elementary. So the grant money would help teachers and school leaders put efforts towards cross-curricular implementation of reading strategies that would help revamp some of our curriculum goals as well. The money could also be used to hire that reading specialist full-time. It seems like there's a misallocation of current funds for curriculum design and something that could easily be fixed with the money being used to support these measures. So to propose a plan of action, I came up with 3 steps to plan, brainstorm, and form a committee to communicate that plan with the stakeholders and then implement and evaluate. So step 1 would be to plan, brainstorm, and develop a committee. So I would gather a committee made up of myself, other assistant principals, if applicable, at Truman Elementary, a reading specialist, several teachers, an instructional coach, or several students or parents of various demographic backgrounds to help give a full view of what could be needed. So we discuss where our budget is currently and then what is needed for an expected outcome. Then we would discuss the specialist findings, review and research different programs or curricular approaches, and submit our grant application in time after our research and review is completed. After we formulate a plan, we would communicate that with the stakeholders. They should be on board with our goals. The teachers will need to be up to date on our committee talk and will be communicated with appropriately about how they need to make some changes within their classrooms. I'll make minutes from our meetings available so I can be transparent about what's being discussed and talked about for people to, witness. And then there are obviously going to have to be some things that change within specific classrooms across the board, such as small group work, individualized instruction, and phonemic awareness teaching for students and for teachers to become fluent in teaching those things. I'll be obviously evaluating teachers more closely while our grant request is being reviewed, and we'll expect to see improvements in those areas in reading so that if we were allocated the money, that we would be able to back that up with research and review from our school itself. In addition, we would need to discuss all of these things with our PLCs, reading goals, implementation techniques for the remainder of the year. It seems like the parents are taking issue with this, understandably so. So I would encourage them to attend meetings, make our minutes available, monthly newsletters, and through attending the meetings myself. Okay, I need to make sure that the parents feel heard and that we're working on ensuring that their issues are resolved and that our school's issues are resolved with their students and their reading score, since it is so important. At the root of all this is the students. So it's always been an urgent mandate that teachers communicate their learning targets to students, and it's even more important now that we have data to show that things need to be changed and things aren't happening and are happening. So we would also need that grant money for professional development of our teachers and standards alignment, so students can refocus their learning when the teacher refocuses his or her teaching. I would also suggest that teachers have individual meetings and individual score discussion with parents and students so that we can work on closing some individual gaps that will then hopefully help bolster our school's overall achievement performance. Okay, and then step 3 would be to implement and evaluate, assuming that grant money is awarded. Okay, and even before it is awarded, it's obviously my duty to ensure that the money is being used appropriately. So we would hire an in-house reading specialist where kids who are performing below grade level can use as a resource. I would call in for reading volunteers from the community to come and work with small groups in certain classrooms. And then, of course, I need some professional development of my staff. And so they would be required to attend 3 of 7 offered professional development training over the course of 2 years. That would include reading strategies, effective data collection, integration of reading in the home, understanding literacy across curriculum, all kinds of topics that we could formulate professional development for. Then in real life, this actually happened at my school, at Eagle Crest High School, where there was a mandatory submission of evidence of how reading instruction is being implemented and delivered. We had to provide complex text and their task and the ultimate goal of those tasks by quarter to the principal. And it was not a gotcha. It was just to kind of continue the dialogue with how we're implementing effective reading instruction. So I would definitely mandate and put that into place at Truman Elementary School. And then, of course, we would need clarification of our continuous school improvement plan around reading strategies and reading improvement. So how does my plan resolve the issue based on promoting the success of all students? I would make learning data-driven and focused on student achievement growth. And throughout this plan, I've kept learning, achievement, and individual student growth at the forefront of my decision making. Okay, so their declining test scores kind of stood out. That prompted the conversation and the action. All students obviously can benefit from teacher professional development training and an in-house reading specialist, provided that it's done effectively and correctly for those who need it. And obviously when teachers are learning and they're supported by administration, students also obviously would be learning and feel supported as well. So to reflect on what I was thinking, valuing, and identifying issues and what issues are still unresolved, I want to start with what I was thinking, even though it's on the right side here. Obviously, these concerns were first brought to light by the parent community and the release of last year's test scores that showed that Truman Elementary was in a kind of a trouble spot with our scores. So that made me would make me think I have to get on this immediately. So I was thinking about how to get all stakeholders on board and ways that we can partner with multiple stakeholders to improve these issues. What I was feeling, obviously pressure. I think any principal feels pressure when test scores come back negatively, and about the timeliness of how I can resolve these issues quickly. Kind of makes me feel some pressure to do some things in the school before the money comes through, such as discuss the findings in PLC and with instructional coaches to get changes started now. We'd have to show evidence of that before the grant money came anyway. Feels a little against the ropes because it speaks to my leadership that in the years that I've been at Truman Elementary School, that my leadership hasn't shown significant improvement with reading scores. So I definitely feel pressure there. And I feel like I wasn't being responsive enough at the outset of my tenure so that that change wasn't being made. So now I can be more reactive and then hopefully proactive in the future to prevent this from happening again. So as far as my values, I was valuing the promise of public education, when properly funded. I valued my students and their efforts, my teachers and their ongoing rigorous demands that are always important to keep in mind. And then the active community we have helps me feel supported in making changes, and so I value their input. I want them to be honest with me. I value their honesty, and I value transparency with them, and I would obviously want to get their support and volunteerism and advocacy in return. Unresolved issues, it's not for sure that we're going to get the grant money, and if not, we need to be creative with how we spend our money so that we can still make these changes without the extra money. It's also not guaranteed that the programs I want to implement will be well received by all stakeholders. I have to be able to navigate that, specifically teachers who need the most instruction or the most overhaul of how they do things in their classroom. So I'll have to make some hard decisions if teachers cannot get on board with our plans. It's not guaranteed that student scores will improve with all of these measures. And if they don't, in spite of all that extra work and the resources and the money, we must go back to the drawing board and start over. We can't just accept that it doesn't work. We have to fix it in some way. So finally, in Category 5, the reflection of Standard 8. Standard 8 says that effective educational leaders engage families in the community in meaningful, reciprocal, and mutually beneficial ways to promote students' academic success and well-being. So how I approach that is that I communicated the reading achievement issue with parent and student community along with plans for improvement. I encouraged community stakeholders to attend and reflect at PTO or other kinds of community meetings to ensure that open dialogue exists. And I encourage their input and participation, such as encouraging reading volunteers from the parent community to come to our school and be involved with the issue head on. How I use data to respond and communicate. I involve parents in the decision making, since parents are the ones that support us and they brought their concerns to us individually, and they trust us to provide a balanced education to their children. We made our findings, minutes, and developments public. We remained transparent as possible so that the community perception changed with how we address low reading scores, and we encouraged the community to feel like they were with me during the entire process. As far as using my knowledge of policies and laws, I made an effort to research, review, and plan for what would be done with the awarded grant money. It reminded me that all students should be given the chance to improve by schools that use their resources appropriately. I used the data to recognize a trend and then attack it kind of head on. I could also analyze what our school needed to improve with regards to professional development opportunities and what specifically I would train my teachers on. And I know that state policy suggests that when schools grow in achievement data, the funding to those schools improves overall as well. And then to establish an ongoing dialogue with decision makers, I worked with the district reading specialist closely in his recommendations and the findings to then suggest that we hire someone full-time to come to our school. I compared his notes with the numbers themselves to spur a data-driven dialogue with my committee that I founded. And then other decision makers outside the school itself would be the professionals hired for professional development work who know the cutting edge programming and research fitting to train teachers for kids at the elementary level. So despite all of this, I think that this plan really supports reading instruction growth at Truman Elementary School. And thank you so much for watching.